the Mitzvas Vidui U'Teshuvah, the mitzvah of confession and Teshuvah. Last time, most of the class was one text from Sefer HaChinuch speaking about what exactly encompasses the mitzvah of confession and Teshuvah. Basically, we established that verbal confession is vital to this process. Not just that it's vital to the process, it's its own thing. Even, for example, when they had to bring a sacrifice, there still had to be verbal confession. Even when now we can't bring sacrifices, there still has to be verbal confession. The verbalization is very important. Then we had other aspects. Verbalization is admittance of what was done wrong. The verbalization is going to solidify our resolve not to go back there again. To recognize that God is the eye that sees and the ear that hears. Sefer HaChinuch went through all the different, but what about this? What about this? And clarified all of it. We still have these mitzvahs. We established that the whole mitzvah of Teshuvah has two aspects to it. One is that zivas hachet, leaving the sin, abandoning sin, I'm not going to go there again. And integral to that is charata, regret. So that feeling that everybody usually tries to escape from, the guilt feeling, the feeling of remorse, is vital to the Teshuvah process. And not just that, we have vidui, which is the verbal confession, and then asking for forgiveness. Which, remember, that's why we have the al chetz that we say multiple times. And that's a whole listing, multiple listings of, in case I have sinned with this, if I have sinned with this, if I have sinned with this. So the verbal confession, the multiple times that we say that, there's actually a daily verbal confession also that's said. So all these things, because the verbal confession is important. Then we looked at this section from Tanya, the Gerasa Tshuva, which gave us more details about how even though when someone sins, there could be suffering or fasting. Those are just other parts to the confession and the Tshuva process. And these are still the main things. The bigger thing that we came to is establishing the fact that every sin, every transgression has a body and a soul. Because every entity has some sort of form and some sort of enlivening aspect to that form. Even a rock, domain, which means silent, but even a rock has a form and then something that makes it alive. So when someone transgresses, they create an entity that has some sort of form and something that makes it alive, which is part of why the whole process is so important, because at minimum, speech is some sort of action. So we want to counterbalance what was created through action. And then going back to why charata, regret, is so important, because we have to counter the feeling that was felt at the time. Whatever sort of satisfaction or pleasure was gained through the transgression, whatever is created through that is going to be countered with the opposite kind of feeling, with an equal and opposite reaction. Both of those are needed, not just to come back from what we've done, but to rectify what we've done. That's what we established last time. And we're going to see a little bit more about the mitzvah of Teshuvah and Vidui, which is confession. And this is from Rambam Hilchos Teshuvah. From Rambam, the section titled The Laws of Teshuvah. Rambam says, what is Teshuvah? That a sinner should abandon his sin and remove it from his thought, and resolve in his heart never to commit them again, as it says, may the wicked abandon his ways. Similarly, he must regret the past, as it states, after I returned I regretted. So we see again how regret is important. Not just saying I'm never going to go there again, but also to have regret about what was done. He must reach the level where he who knows the hidden will testify concerning him that he will never return to the sin again, as it states, we will no longer say to the work of our hands, you are our gods. He must verbally confess and state these matters which he resolved in his heart. So again, not just saying I'm never going to go there again. I will check the label so I never wear shatnez again. So not just that, but also the verbal confession. There's similar conclusions that are coming across the board. If a person transgresses any of the mitzvahs of the Torah, whether a positive command or a negative command, whether willingly or inadvertently, when he repents and returns from his sin, he must confess before God, blessed be he. As it states, if a man or a woman commit any of the sins of man, they must confess the sin that they committed. This refers to verbal confession. We already saw that even for positive mitzvah, there could be regret and teshuvah for that. Oh man, I regret that I missed a chance to do this mitzvah. And here we see it's not just the wanton sins, as they call it, the willing sins, but also inadvertently. If someone realizes afterwards that they messed up, they walked out of the house, they were carrying on Shabbos or whatever. So even for that, confession also. This confession is a positive command, so it's a positive mitzvah to confess. How does one confess? He states, I implore you, God, I sinned, I transgressed, I committed iniquity before you by doing the following. Behold, I regret and am embarrassed for my deeds. I promise never to repeat this act again. These are the essential elements of confession. Whoever confesses profusely and elaborates on these matters is worthy of praise. It's not just enough to say, oh, so sorry, I'm never going to go there again. There has to be real resolve never to go there again, but also, again, that feeling of regret has to accompany the process. And so those who bring sin offerings or guilt offerings, whether they bring sacrifices for their inadvertent or willful transgressions, their sacrifices will not atone for them until they repent and make a verbal confession. As it states, it shall confess the sin he has committed upon it, from the Torah. Similarly, those obligated to be executed or lashed by the court do not attain atonement through their death or lashing unless they repent and confess. There is an idea that certain sort of deaths atone for a person's life for something that they did. And we kind of saw above with things with suffering or things like that. Obviously, you can't diagnose someone, God forbid, in that regard, because you can't judge anybody. But there is still the idea that there are some measures of a way a person passes away can bring atonement for them. And even a punishment of the court would bring atonement, but only if it's accompanied by the tshuva and the confession. Similarly, someone who injures a colleague or damages his property does not attain atonement, even though he pays him what he owes, until he confesses and makes a commitment never to do such a thing again, as implied by the phrase, any of the sins of man. If they damage someone's property, let's say, and then they pay them as per the courts, whatever's supposed to be paid, he has to still go through the process of the confession and saying, I'm never going to go there again, things like that. It's not just enough to just write the check. Now that we have that all established, we see what halachically, we see according to the law, what's written according to vidui of confession and tshuva. Now we're going to start digging in more. Tshuva and confession, tshuva and vidui, atone for blemishes on the soul and spiritual realms caused by transgression. How does the Jewish soul impact the flow of divine life? light. Remember how we learned many, many moons ago in Micha Mocha how everything has a spiritual source and there's a whole flow situation that's going on with Mazel that's about a flow and the angels that are giving light and there's a whole progression of everything that happens. When you look at the sphere, what we call the 10 attributes, we know that these apply in every world. Looking at the top one of Atzilus, there is a main prototype, but it's kind of the next level prototype for the worlds to follow. There is a flow of divine light that's moving through there. When we say divine light, we mean that which enlivens the world, which brings life to the world. More light equals more life. More light equals better life. More light is good. When a person transgresses, we're going to see about all of this, when a person transgresses, they interrupt the flow of the light. They create a sort of puncture in that process because the process is all going smoothly and then someone hit the wrong button, someone trips somewhere and it interrupts the flow. This impacts the divine light that's being brought down into the world and it also impacts your soul itself. That's why I talked about blemishes on the soul and the spiritual realms caused by transgression. Now what we're going to see is that we're going to look specifically, okay, we're talking about Jewish people. How specifically would a Jewish person have such power to be able to do this? And then again, we're going to have to get to the rectification of all things. So this is from Parsha Shlach. It says, it's called Mitzvas Havaya. We actually say this in the third paragraph of Shema. Mitzvah Tzitzis. There shall be tzitzis for you, and when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of Havaya to perform them, and you shall not wander after your hearts and after your eyes, after which you are going astray. We've seen this before where it says, don't go after your hearts and after your eyes. Why did it have heart first? Because when the heart is going to desire something, the eyes will go find it. So that's why it puts hearts before our eyes. Here's the deal. The part that we underline is that it says, Mitzvas Hashem, it has the name of Havaya. If you remember, like all the Maamar are going to come into play now. If you remember going to Kol Marach Be'echad, when we learned about Shema Yisrael Havaya Elokeinu Havaya Echad, Havaya is Elokeinu, Havaya is our nature. We learned that Elokim, this name of Elokeinu, Elokim is the shield, that's the turtle shell for the godly light that creates the world. You can't just have raw sun, we need a format, we need a way to take it in, a packaging for it. So that's what nature is. Nature is the packaging for the divine light that creates the world. What's the divine light that creates the world? It comes from the name of Havaya, which is the name of infinity. It encompasses Haya Havaviyah, all those letters are within the word of Havaya. It's beyond time and space, etc. However, there's still an aspect that even though it's infinite and above the worlds, there's still an aspect that's within the world because that's the creative force that moves through here. So here what we're pinpointing is the fact that the mitzvos specifically are connected to this name of Havaya. The entire purpose of mitzvos is to draw down and reveal Or Ein Sof within Havaya. So the whole point of mitzvos is to take that infinite Or Ein Sof, the light without end, infinite essence, and draw down within Havaya as it creates the 10 spheres of Atzilus and structures existence, bringing the infinite into the finite. What does mitzvos do? It takes God's essence and draws it down into the structure of the world, basically. Here we're talking about in the highest realms, but that's only because that's the starting point of everything, so we can use that as the model. What happens there is going to be repeated as you go down through the flow of the chain of creation. God's essence, draw it down into the world. How do we do that? And it's going to be done through this medium, the structure that's established by the name of Havaya. What's that structure? The medium are these 10 attributes. How do we do that with mitzvahs? Why do we know that we do that with mitzvahs? Because here, as we see from the verse, it's called Mitzvas Havaya. So specifically, mitzvahs are connected to this name. If you want to see where we're going with this, if someone does not a mitzvah, or if someone does against a mitzvah, it interrupts the flow of things. Because mitzvahs are going to be drawing it down, and then someone transgresses or something, that's how the puncture comes in. That's how the interruption of the flow comes in. Okay, great. Find your mitzvah, okay, maybe I'll work on this one. So this is from Tanya Yigeres Teshuvah, Letters of Teshuvah. There's several of them. We already saw one section, this is from a different one of the letters. However, all we have said refers to the culmination of the atonement, to polishing the soul clean before God, so that no vestige or former sin remains after repentance. The word kapara, like Yom Kippur, kapara, it doesn't mean atonement, just means to wipe it clean. It's not just that we want to say, oh, so sorry for what we did. We want this to be like it never existed. We want to undo what we've done, if we can somehow. But the beginning of the mitzvah of tshuva and its core is a true and wholehearted return to God. That's why also, remember that we're talking about tshuva, we don't really like the word repentance, it really means return to God, reconnecting with God. Which also, by the way, someone doesn't specifically have to sin to be able to draw closer to God. So someone can still strengthen their connection with God even without any sort of transgression. As the soon become apparent, this return unto God means returning until the point that one has restored completeness to Havaya, the four-letter name of God that is to be found within every Jewish soul. So we see how we're going to bring in this name of Havaya. There was something that was interrupted that, and we have to complete it again. The letters that comprise the name of Havaya are in descending order, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. Here, if you look at the design, the Yud is over there by Chachma, the Hey by Bina, the Vav is kind of the 6 attributes to follow, and the Hey is Malchus kingship, which is the final stage. Yud, because it's a little dot of a letter, so that's the starting point. Hey is a letter that spreads out. So Hispashtus, that's Hey. Vav, like a straight line, it draws down. Hamshacha, it draws down. The last Hey is that it spreads out again. that mimics the design of the letters. So the letters, it's not just that, there's numbers that connect them to different things. The whole design of the letter speaks to some sort of way of how the energy within it, the creative force within it works. This must now be explained thoroughly and comprehensively. Let us begin with the Zohar's interpretation of Teshuvah according to Sod, the mystical interpretation of the Torah. We're going to Kabbalah, so we're looking at now the secret, deep level of interpretation of what Teshuvah is. Teshuvah is Tashav Hey. The Hey shall return. If you look at the word of Teshuvah, you could divide it right there before the last letter, and you get Tashav Hey. You got to return the Hey. The function of Teshuvah is to return the letter Hey of the divine name Havaya, to reattach it to the level represented by the letter that precedes it, just as it was attached to it before the individual sinned. The reconnection of the letter Hey to the preceding letter Vav is Teshuvah Tata, lower level Teshuvah. The reconnection of the former Hey to the preceding letter Yud is Teshuvah Ilah, higher level Teshuvah. Surprise, there's different levels of Teshuvah. Okay, so we have the 4 letters. When something causes the puncture, that's the interruption of the flow. Teshuvah means that we have to reattach it. We have to put it back where it was. So part of the process and part of why these steps of regret and verbal confession, all these facilitate the returning, the reconnecting, the reattachment. We're going to see why it is specifically that a Jewish soul can have the power to do this. The soul originated in the internal aspect of life force of flow issuing from God, from the innerness of God, not just from an external part, but from an inner part. We've seen sort of differences like this before when we talk about external will and inner will. What does God really want versus what's a by the way kind of thing. It goes to the idea also of God having breathed the life into us. That he breathed the soul into Adam. Breath comes from deep within. That's only chapter 2 of Tanya. Just bringing down the point about how the soul comes from the innerness of God. It's not just this external thing that God created. Soul originated in the internal aspect of the life force and flow issuing from God. It's only afterward, to enable it to be invested within the body, that the soul descended to a more external level. That's where it starts from, but there is still this process that brings it outward, sort of, because if not, it can't get into a body. It then descended through ever more concealing planes. Also, like the angels who were created by means of the letters that comprise the divine utterance, let us make man, so it could eventually be invested in a body in this inferior physical world. So the soul is coming from the innermost aspect of God. But it can't be like that in the physical world. So there still has to be some level of gradation. There has to be some sort of process, which we even see, let's make man, there's some sort of verbalization that this highly sourced soul should be able to enter into a physical world. But no, physical and spiritual are antithetical to each other. They can't just mesh without God acting upon them. This then is the difference between souls and angels. Souls derive from the innermost aspect of godliness, the name of Havaya, while angels are rooted in the external aspect of godliness, the divine name Elokim. The soul of man comes from a much more inner level than angels, basically. The name Elokim is an external state. Remember also, because the name Elokim is nature, that is the turtle shell. So we see that it is an external state. The name Elokim is an external state relative to the name Havaya, but the soul of man deriving from the internal aspect of the godly vivifying powers and part of the name Havaya. The name of Havaya indicates the innermost dimension of life-giving power, which far transcends the state of letters. Okay. It keeps going back to the letters because God created the world through speech. And creation equals nature equals the name of Elokim. The nature Elokim. Angels come from there because angels are created through that process. The soul of man, however, comes from the innermost aspect of God. It's more connected to the name of Havaya. Havaya Elokeinu, our true nature is Havaya. It's our job to bring the infinite down into the finite. When we're doing things the way we're supposed to be doing and we're just being good people and going about our day, we are effectuating that the infinite can come down into the finite. However, if we trip and fall a little bit and we send the glass crashing, then there's an interruption in that flow. What we want to do now is figure out how to rectify it. It's not just that how do we rectify it, it's that God allows us to rectify it. That's what the whole thing is. That even though we've done something that, oh my God, you've interrupted the whole flow of things, God says there's a way to come back from it, not just to say sorry for it, but you could actually repair what was broken, basically. How can we do that? Because our souls are connected to this name of Havaya. The mitzvahs are connected to the name of Havaya. Havaya is what draws down God's essence through the worlds, through the structure that it creates of these 10 attributes within the worlds that it brings it down, etc. So you see, we're putting in these pieces and we're seeing how they all connect to things that were already said. What characteristics of the soul also characterize Havaya, the 4-letter name of God, and thus indicate that the soul is indeed a part of that name. Just as the 10 spheres are included within the name of Havaya, so are there 10 corresponding faculties intrinsic to the soul. The whole thing is that we're made in God's image, that we also have these 10 attributes, faculties, whatever language you want to use for it. So we are the metaphor, what the godness, some form of that. There's a well-known statement of Eliyahu in the passage Patach Eliyahu, you're he who elicited the 10 tikkunim, little garments, which we call the 10 spheres, by which to conduct the concealed worlds, and the revealed words, you are wise but not with a noble attribute of wisdom, you understand but not with a noble attribute of understanding, and so on with regard to the remaining sphere. All the 10 spheres are included or represented in the source, the name of Havaya. Even though we have the 10 attributes, kind of language that we're using about how God interacts with the world, because this is sort of language that we can fully understand, but God cannot be fully encapsulated into anything. This is the part, the Kunei Zohar, where it comes from. This is what Eliyahu, as in Elijah the prophet, basically said about God. So all the sphere is in these 10 attributes. Each one has its own name, and with them angels are called. But you have no specific name. For you are he that fills all names, and you are the completeness of everything. God cannot be compacted into a single anything. And when you withdraw from them, all those names are left like a body without a soul. You are wise, but not with any noble wisdom. We can't approach. We can't even try to figure this out. You are he that understands, but not with any noble understanding. You have no specific place other than to make known your strength and your power to humans and to show them how the world is governed through judgment and through mercy, which are righteousness and justice according to the deeds of people. So, per se, God interacts with us through these attributes, but none of them can fully encapsulate him. He's not any one of these things. Judgment is Gvura. Do these look familiar? Judgment is Gvura. Justice is the middle pillar. Tefar. Righteousness, Tzedek, is the holy kingdom. Malchut, which is Malchut, scales of righteousness. Two pillars of truth. That's Achod. The hint of righteousness, sign of the covenant. Yisod. It just listed here kind of the way that we always make the diagrams. This is part of that description about how we know what the diagram looks like. So this is a reference to that about where each one stands. All to show how the world is governed, but not that you have any specific righteousness, which is judgment, and no specific justice, which is mercy, and none of any of these attributes at all. So we have all these things that we sort of use to describe God interacting with us, but none of them fully encompass him. Kind of what we're getting at here. So going back to this whole idea of mitzvos avaya, we wrap up here. Mitzvos draw down this aspect of avaya. It's called Sarissa del Tata, an awakening from below. As in, we down here, we do God's will, and when we do that, up above, God's like, hey, they just did it for me. Now I will send back down to them. An awakening from below elicits Sarissa del Ela, an awakening from above, whereby the infinite is compelled to act against his nature and contract itself into the spheres, so Hashem's light can nurture, enliven, and illuminate the world. All to say, and part of this is actually going to be connected to what we're going to get to next time. When we talk about mitzvos avaya, and drawing down the infinite light, all these things, what do we mean by that? When we down here do as God wills that we do, so we do a mitzvah down here, that's considered an awakening from below, as in we're acting on our own initiative, and that wakes, quote unquote, wakes God up above. Hey, look, we did the action, and now there's an eagle reaction above, but God wakes up and is like, hey, even though my great light is too big for anything, I will compact it. That goes to the whole thing of Tzitzum, but I will compact it now and send it down into the world. There was an action below. I like this action, and now I will send in response. I will send down to the divine light in response. This light that's being drawn down is now light that can nurture the world, enlivens the world, and illuminates the world. So yes, we like this light. We want more of this light. How do we bring more of the nurture, the enlivening, and the illumination? Through mitzvahs. Through this process of us acting and then God responding to the action that we do.